Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Winback, and on today's episode of RPG Radio, we've got Diablo 4 and we are doing some endgame farming with our Deathblow Barbarian. These are going to be 3 dungeons that are fantastic for gaining XP and pushing into that late game, and one that is so awful you should never, ever go into it. Salvage the sigil every time. We'll keep that one for the end because the bad ones are bad and there's no reason to give them any attention unless it is to steer people clear. But the first part of this video has 3 that are relatively good, and if you are not making one of those super meta heavy builds, these are going to be a couple nightmare dungeons to form the bread and butter for your off-meta characters. So, that being said, let's stop wasting time. The first nightmare dungeon on the list is Champion's Demise. Champion's Demise is relatively simple in what it asks you to do. You're just going to collect 3 rocks, put them on an altar, and then go fight a boss. Simple, easy, clean. There is a good deal of walking in between those objectives for the first leg of this nightmare dungeon, but the good news is that the enemies in Champion's Demise are relatively easy to kill, and they are very high in number because of the types of enemies that they are. That means that, in the general sense, you're going to be getting a decent chunk of XP. If you are looking specifically for two-handed or one-handed swords, spiders are the enemies that you want to hyper farm for that type of gear, so you're going to have a good time in Champion's Demise. Goatmen are next to skeletons in terms of difficulty, so goatmen can creep up on you. They do have a couple enemy types that can lay down some pretty big damage and CC, but all in all, if you have some decent room clear, your character should be able to handle them pretty easily. They do clump up a lot. Their health bars are not the highest things in the world. As long as you're attacking those priority targets like the shamans and the maulers, then you're not going to have as difficult a time taking out the rest of the goatmen. The ranged goatmen, the javelin throwers, really aren't that big a deal as long as you are bobbing and weaving like you should be with any class, unless your whole gimmick is to stand still and take damage. So that's not how my build plays, though. I do have to do a lot of leaping, a lot of dodging, a lot of potion healing, and that being said, the shamans giving their minions any kind of empowerment is not cool with me. So just remember, it's the same with any dungeon, anything that you do in Diablo 4. You do have to focus down particular enemies, or you are going to get absolutely run over. Whether it's going to be CC, whether it's buffs that they are giving to other enemies around, bad things can happen. So, that being said, Champion's Demise is still relatively good for the ease of enemy killing, enemy clearing. Spiders and goatmen, like I said, not too much trouble. There is other things to worry about in terms of the spiders, though, because they do shoot out a whole lot of goop that's going to stick you to the ground, and they like to do this extremely often. It's really kind of gross just how much they throw a whole bunch of webbing on the ground. And when you're in tier 4, they're incredibly accurate as well, so you've got to do your best to either have an unstoppable up all the time, or you have got to dodge a lot of things. Now, the nightmare affix that I'm currently using in this one is the enemies explode when they die. It's a random chance for explosion, but it is pretty high. So, when you are a melee character, if you see this affix, the only reason I'm using it right now in Champion's Demise is because I wanted to record this dungeon, and this was the only sigil that I had for it. But if you're melee, I would highly recommend avoiding the exploding enemy corpses like the plague, because I am going to burn, I think, 3 revives in this dungeon because of that, because I just want to jump in, kill a big group of enemies, but I get hit with a random CC, and suddenly it's game over because we're standing on top of a whole bunch of people who are dead while being stunned for 2 million years, or frozen, you know, because frozen enemies do still show up in these dungeons, and that alone makes me want to claw my eyes out. So this is the worst possible role for Champion's Demise, and I would still recommend it over a lot of other, well, some other dungeons in the game. Champion's Demise also has the positive effect of not feeling like you are in literal hell, like some of the other Nightmare dungeons. I don't know if that is intentional. I know these are supposed to be difficult, but dungeons like Onyx Hold or Serpent's Lair are incredibly obnoxious because they either A, have enemies who are overloaded with CC, or B, they have objectives and missions to accomplish that feel like they take an inordinate amount of time compared to something like Champion's Demise. Champion's Demise has enough enemy density and enough simplicity to make it long enough that it feels rewarding and that you're getting enough opportunities for gear to drop, but also short enough that it doesn't feel like an unholy grind from the nether that you are being forced to do on repeat because it's just the only sigil that keeps dropping. Now, like I said, this affix specifically is horrible for melee. The exploding enemies affix is something you should avoid. But coupled with Champion's Demise, I think it's doable because this map is just so good, both as far as the missions, the monsters, and the overall feel of what you get done in this dungeon. This is also another really good dungeon for barbarians who are going for more of an axe focused builds. For barbarians specifically, axes are going to deal more damage to healthy enemies. So if you're going for a build that likes to do a lot of damage to full health bar bad guys, this is a great place to farm both one-handed and two-handed axes because of the Goatmen. Goatmen also drops, they drop staffs and totems for druids, so they're not a bad option for sorks or druids either. We're not going to spend the entire video on Champion's Demise, but I did start with it for a reason. It is simple, it is dense, and it is going to be the type of dungeon that you'll be okay with finding a sigil for, regardless of what drops. Unless it's cold enchanted, and then if you don't know, if nobody's told you, you just salvage all the cold enchanted sigils. Just no matter what dungeon they are, they're never going to be worth it. Don't tempt yourself. It's just too much headache, and they're worth some dust. So dust is better than cold enchanted. And my next trick is called the Disappearing Goat. Now you see him, now you don't. Just another reason that the Champion's Demise is really fantastic stuff for off-meta builds like this one. Death Blow is going to do lots of damage to dungeon bosses, and it should never be underestimated because I think that was just, you know, a casual 95% of that boss's health bar. So you're welcome if you haven't ever seen it before, but it's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun build. So let's talk about the second Nightmare dungeon on this list that I'd rank as pretty good, and that is going to be Wraithwind Wilds. Wraithwind Wilds is not a name that I hear from a lot of people when it comes to Diablo 4. This is similar to Champion's Demise in the quest that it has you complete, but it's also got a bunch of different enemy types in it. Rather than your Goatman and Spider Fair, we've got wildlife with thorn beasts. We got these big old piggies. We got bears. We've just got beasts of all kinds dropping their loot. And the loot that they drop is going to be things like your chests, your crossbows, and your one-handed swords. I should clarify that doesn't mean that's all that they drop, but they have a 5 times multiplier to drop those types of items. I think that's what I read. The frequency at which they drop those specific types of items is going to be higher than things of the other sort. On top of the beasts, though, you have got your bandits. Bandits are dropping daggers and maces, so if you are rocking a rogue, this is going to be a pretty decent nightmare dungeon to farm as well, depending on what type of rogue you're going for, but crossbow and dagger seem pretty good. As far as the barbarians out there like myself who are rocking Wraithwind Wilds, the maces are one hand, I believe. I don't think it's both 1 and 2 from the bandits, but you know, I could be wrong. I have not done the research on that, and from the charts that I've seen, there's not really clarification. So maybe it's both, but maybe it's just one-handed as well. Your one-handed swords also, for the barbarian, swords are pretty good because swords give you increased critical strike damage. So if you're using 2 one-handed swords, they're both going to be dumping a whole lot into that stat for you. And depending on whether or not you're building towards a crit heavy type of barbarian, swords they're pretty wicked good. Maces increase overpower damage whether they're 1 or 2-handed, so if you're going for that type of barbarian, which I feel like is probably more common, maces are going to be the good stuff that you need as well. But let's focus on Wraithwind Wilds here. This is a last stand quest. There's no way I'm going to do this, so we're just going to skip that. Last stands as an event are garbage. I don't think I have been able to finish one of those without having everybody die. But I need to stop complaining and talk about Wraithwind Wilds some more. So, this one is going to have you go for a full room clear. So you're going to have to kill all of the enemies in the first mission. The next one has you killing 3 elites, which are big animals? Beasts. They're big beasts. 1 of a bear, 1 pig, and 1 quill rat. Once you kill all of those, you move on to the third, which is a big boss. That's your third objective, and it is a huge tree boss. And I think that Wraithwind Wilds is... well, I can't say that for sure, but it's the only one that I've done so far that has the big tree boss at the end, which is fantastic. Bramble is actually really interesting compared to a lot of the other bosses that I've come across, like, you know, the spider, the Gloom Weaver. No, that's a Grim Dawn reference. Broodmother, that's it. Broodmother is the spider, and the Khazra Abomination, that sort of stuff. But Bramble as a boss is actually really cool. This is kind of a more lore feeling dungeon, and it shows. So, all that being said, the missions are going to be simple to complete. The density is enough in this dungeon that you won't feel like you are just backtracking or looping around infinitely. And since it ends in a boss, you have that finality to the dungeon that you don't have to go chase any more garbage around. You just get to go in, you get to smack a boss around, and you get to feel that accomplishment. So, apart from the gear types, the density, everything that I've mentioned so far, this dungeon is absolutely one of the best of the bunch. So it is coming in just behind Champion's Demise, but I do think it is very, very close to that dungeon in terms of enjoyable activities and doable activities without getting absolutely slaughtered by tons of chain CC and really just other annoying types of enemies. Now, the last nightmare dungeon on the list is a spider dungeon, and I know that may sound counterintuitive because spiders are an annoying enemy, but for some reason in Blind Burrows it just works. This dungeon is kind of on the top of everyone's list as far as I can tell, from what I've read anyway, and there's a pretty good reason for it. The dungeon itself it has a lot of corridors, but the corridors open up into larger spaces to fight with the spiders who inevitably want to web you to the floor, but have a harder time doing it. Blind Burrows has enormous amounts of enemy density, with the spiders and the spider corpses exploding into very tiny spiders, which are, at this point, if you're playing Deathblow, you should be able to tell, are very, very easy to squish in large quantities. Deathblow will actually take them from 100 to 0, and if you only have one charge, you can go back up to 2 charges, assuming you have the gear, by killing a whole clump of tiny spiders very easily. Blind Burrows has you chase down 3 spider corpses, 3 spider corpse elites in the first mission, and they're relatively easy to find because the map has them kind of off to the side in these little nooks, where the main dungeon map is just kind of a big loop. It's more like 2 loops attached together, but at the edges of those loops, you just walk off, you find the elites, you kill them, and then you run your way all the way up to the boss door, which is the Broodmother, a gigantic, gross spider who is relatively easy to squash when it comes to a Deathblow build. Now, if you're playing something like a Necromancer or a Sorcerer, this is, again, another really, really easy dungeon to have maximum effectiveness for those classes, because anything with lots of AoE focus built into it is going to have a good time. If I had to give an example without ever really having dived into the Necromancer, the sheer volume of spiders in this dungeon should mean near infinite corpses. They're just going to be everywhere. And then with that being said, if you're playing a corpse explosion Necromancer, I mean, the entire dungeon should just collapse in on itself. I mentioned this earlier in Champion's Demise, but the spiders drop more heavily on the sword type gear, so you can farm a pretty decent chunk of legendary swords here. It's also good to start farming up here if you're looking for uniques in the sword variety. Spiders, it just can't be stated enough, but apart from doing two-handed swords, spiders drop gloves, they drop chest pieces, and they drop focus as well. I think focus is a necro thing. Is it a necro and a sword thing? No, I'm pretty sure it's just a necromancer thing, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't play those classes. I might start a necro here soon because I want to get an ultimate tanky class, but for the moment, I don't touch them. I'm just all barbarian, all day, all night, screaming, shouting, jumping all over the place. Well, you know, to at least some extent. I'm not Spinbob Screampants. I don't do whirlwind barbarian like a crazy person, but anyway, back to Blind Burrows. The spiders, obviously, the gear that they drop is pretty plentiful. Good stuff happening there. There are so many of them in this dungeon, it is going to be damn near impossible for you to not get something you want after a couple nightmare runs of the Blind Burrows. I don't think there's really a whole lot more to say. If you want a big breakdown for Blind Burrows about why this is just everybody's top tier, I suggest just checking out Reddit. I mean, you could search Reddit easily to get all the minute details on why Blind Burrows is everybody's favorite, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't love it because I'm, you know, a hipster. I don't like what everybody else likes, and I certainly don't like being webbed to the ground on cooldown by spiders, you know, when they live, that is. But it's okay. It's okay. It's top tier for a reason. I had to put it on the list because it's good. I don't have to like it though. I don't have to be a fan. I can just be a casual observer who says, yeah, that seems pretty efficient. That seems like a good thing to have, even if I don't want to participate in it that much. But all good things must come to an end. We got 3 of the best dungeons in the game out of the way, so let's talk about what is one of the worst dungeons in the entire game, and that is going to be Conclave. Conclave is the epitome of annoying cyclical trash. You can see that yet again, I got the exploding body modifier, or exploding enemy modifier, and that is just icing on the dookie cake, because Conclave is pretty terrible all by itself. So, if you weren't aware, the Nightmare Dungeon Conclave actually has 4 missions for you to complete. The final mission is a boss. It's just a boss monster. You don't have to go through a boss door to kill it. And that is really the only redeeming quality that it has. And that does not go very far in redeeming this map. So, you know, if I had to put it in scale of numbers, that boss coming right at you is like, that's like a 5% positive, you know? Whereas going into the dungeon to begin with is already like negative 5,000%. Just stepping into this dungeon is annoying. So to give you the details on the missions, the first mission has you killing 2 elites, which isn't a terrible thing. Obviously, killing elites is what we want to do. They give you big chunks of experience, they drop better gear, it's good, right? It's what comes after that that just takes you on the downward spiral. The second mission after killing those elites is going to have you chasing corpses, so not even enemies, looking for a randomly generated key. The key is in the pockets of one of the NPC corpses in this dungeon, and if you, like me, are unlucky enough to have to go through that entire rotation of corpses only to find the key on the last person, it's completely understandable if you just want to get up and walk away from your computer, because that is awful. All the while you're trying to find those keys off of the corpses, you're going to be chased by an infinite number of flies. Flies come out of those corpses. They come out of fly spawners. They come out of everywhere. They come out of your... You can decide where they come from. But there is so many flies that it is honestly just easier to lay down and let the existential dread give you that slow, natural death that you've been hoping for, as opposed to killing all the flies in the map. I mean, I cannot explain to you how terrible flies are as an enemy. They die in one hit, but they pack so much grief into such a tiny package. It is insane. Flies slow you down, for anybody who's not aware. Maybe if you're a Thorns build, flies aren't a big deal. I could see that being good, right? But flies slow you down. They don't do a whole lot of damage, but there's tons of them. They make the dungeon ridiculously longer because it takes longer to hit point A to point B. It's awful. Flies are a terrible enemy. I don't like the way that they work. I don't like anything about them. It's just, no, let's not do that. But once you find the key from all the corpses, now you get to go into a dungeon room and kill all of the enemies. That's right, you get a slay all mission after finding the key on a randomly generated NPC corpse that has been throwing flies at you for the last 5 minutes. I'm not even sure what the flies and the fly spawners actually count as enemy-wise. I don't know what type of gear they drop, because I don't know how they're classified. So that's just yet another annoying part of them. Not to mention, when there are so many flies and you kill them all in one swing with Deathblow, if you have the exploding corpse affix, which is, you know, just on the nose for how terrible this dungeon is, there are so many exploding corpses. It's just... there are no words for my frustration. But cultists are the other enemy type in this dungeon, and cultists drop daggers and helmets. So if you need a dagger and a helmet, maybe just go do Wraithwind Wilds so you can get some daggers off of the bandits. Conclave is literally garbage. It's just hot steaming dookie. And there you have it. I mean, it ended as unceremoniously as it began, as a big fly boss tried to hunt me down and got absolutely squashed. That's it though. I guess we're ending the video on a high note because we're done with Conclave. There's nothing left to do except to tell you guys that I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Am I off? Am I on? Peace out.